Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's storm update. I'm Heather Fairbairn, and I'll be your moderator today. Today, we're joined by Minister John Lohr, the minister responsible for Nova Scotia's Emergency Management Office, Bob Robichaud, warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Joining us as well for questions will be Paul Mason, Executive Director of Nova Scotia Emergency Management Office, and as well Matt Drover, Senior Director of Energy Delivery with Nova Scotia Power. Joining us also is Chrissy Bailey, Senior Director of Field Operations with Eastlink. And finally, rounding out the pack is Jeff Moore, Network Director, Atlantic for Bell. And with that, allow me to turn things over to Minister Lohr for some opening remarks. Go ahead, Minister.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I know we've all been closely following Hurricane Lee's track over the past number of days. And while the storm may be weakening, it is still a significant storm, so we need to be ready. Bob will tell us more about the latest forecast in just a moment. I want to take this opportunity to remind Nova Scotians, if they haven't already done so, the time to prepare is now, before the storm reaches our shores. And while we can all expect to see some pretty foul weather this weekend, it will be particularly important for those living in Southwestern Nova Scotia and along the Fundy coast to take precautions and be prepared in advance of Lee's arrival. As a province, we've also been getting ready for Hurricane Lee. We've been working with Environment Canada, other government departments, municipalities, Nova Scotia Power, Telecommunications, and other partners to gather information, identify local risks, and mobilize resources in advance of the approaching storm. That said, it is still a significant storm, and that means we can anticipate heavy rains and high winds, which can cause storm surge, flooding, and power outages. So it's important that we are all ready. That means staying up to date on the forecasts, having an emergency kit ready with enough water, food, and medication to last several days, taking steps to ready your property by trimming trees and branches, securing gates, doors, and windows, moving lawn furniture, and securing watercraft, charging your cell phones and devices, fueling vehicles, and making an emergency plan for your family and checking in on your neighbors. You'll find lots more tips and information on our social media channels and website. With that, I'll turn things over to Bob Robichaud for an update. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. Premièrement, je voudrais dire que je serai disponible pour répondre des questions en français, s'il y a des questions en français après le briefing. So just looking at where the storm is now and where it's headed, just as of noon today, the storm was just shy of about 1,000 kilometers southwest of Halifax. As Minister mentioned, the storm is slowly weakening. The maximum sustained winds at the present time are about 130 kilometers per hour. But this is a very, very large storm. Based on some of the satellite images that we're seeing and the way the storm is evolving, it appears that it has begun that transition to what we call a post-tropical storm. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that a post-tropical storm is somehow a lesser storm. Post-tropical, what we mean by post-tropical is essentially the structure of the storm is different. It says nothing about the intensity. So we expect this storm, as it approaches and as it gets close to the coastline, to be very close to hurricane strength. We're thinking just below, but it will still be a large storm at very near hurricane strength at the time. Whether it's tropical or post-tropical prior to arriving here, the designation is not really important right now. We're pretty much locked in on where it's going to go. It's probably going to come up into southwestern Nova Scotia. The center of the storm is, but again, the impacts are going to be felt a great distance beyond where the center actually tracks. So we're still looking at southwestern Nova Scotia for some of the stronger winds, also for the heaviest rainfall as well. We have expanded some of our watches, specifically our hurricane watches, farther up the coast towards the Halifax area, even into parts of the eastern shore. So the modeling is kind of showing some of those stronger winds might expand further up the coast. So there are going to be some tweaks to the forecast from here into tomorrow. We should start to feel the impacts of this storm in southwestern Nova Scotia tonight. So the time to prepare certainly is today. Tomorrow will be too late. By the time we get into tomorrow, we're going to feel the impacts of this storm across the entire province. And that will continue during the day tomorrow into tomorrow night. And some areas are going to still see some lingering gusty winds on Sunday, even as the storm um, pulls away towards Newfoundland. So this is going to be kind of a prolonged event. In terms of storm surge, we are monitoring some waves that are approaching the coast as with any tropical system. And we have issued storm surge warnings for the Atlantic coast specifically, and for the entire Atlantic coast of mainland Nova Scotia. The timing for that would be tomorrow during the morning hours. That's when the high tide is, generally between 9 and noon tomorrow. And there's another high tide later in the evening. So we're keeping that storm surge warning going into that evening high tide. But as of right now, the modeling suggests that it might be the morning high tide that might be a little bit worse than the evening one. But any kind of change in the timing will have an impact on that as well. Looking at storm surge into the Bay of Fundy minus Basin area, we don't expect that it will be a major issue there. So that is thankful. We're not in a run of very high tides right now, so we do have some buffer there in that part of the coastline. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Bob. Well, it sounds like a good weekend to hunker down with a book. So those are my plans. With that, we'll now open the Q&A portion. We'll do one question, one follow-up from media in the time that we have available. And I would ask that you would indicate who your question is directed to. And of course, our guests, if you would like to add to response, please feel free to indicate that. And as a reminder, in addition to Minister Lohr and Bob Robichaud, we are also joined by Paul Mason, as well as Matt Drover from NSP, Chrissy Bailey from Eastlink, and Jeff Moore from Bell. And so with that, we'll start with CBC's Taryn Grant. Go ahead, Taryn.
Hi, thank you. My question is for both Chrissy Bailey and Jeff Moore. Can you please speak about what specifically has been done since Fiona to harden your systems?
Sure, absolutely. Great question, and to be honest, not an unexpected question. So from Bell's perspective, there's really been three areas we focused on in terms of improvement. And the first is investment in fixed generators for both our wireless as well as what I'll call our wireline or internet home phone business services network. So we've invested $10 million deploying 100 new fixed generators at our large cell sites across Atlantic Canada. Obviously, those fixed generators create a secondary power supply in event that the primary power supply from Nova Scotia Power is impacted due to the storm. In addition, we've invested another $10 million in fixed generators for 50 sites for our large buildings on the internet, TV, home phone side. And as well, we've purchased a number of new mobile generators to be able to use for those sites that don't have fixed generators. In addition, we have a go-forward plan, including this year, of investing $30 million to install 150 generators on our wireline sites within Atlantic Canada. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is what I'll call around fuel supply. And if we look back at our experience during Fiona, in the initial days post-storm, there were challenges associated with access to fuel for our fixed generators that we had at sites. So we've worked with our fuel suppliers to actually secure a fuel supply in trucks prior to the storm hitting. So we kind of disconnect ourselves from what I'll call the supply chain for fuel in those initial days post-storm. And the third area of focus is what I'll call human resource. Bell being a national company, we've always leveraged our co-workers in Ontario and Quebec to help us when we have a storm. in this case, we've planned for the worst case, and we've gone further to secure the resource, make sure we know who's able to travel, what they need to bring with them from a fleet perspective, from a generator perspective, from a materials perspective, to allow us to better respond to a storm.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Let's go to Chrissy Bailey with Eastlink.
I'm going to sound a lot like Jeff. We made basically the same 3 improvements. We added a significant amount of generators to Nova Scotia Power mobile network, 20 plus fixed generators. Our wireline service, we've added additional fixed mobile generators, and then a large complement of portable generators that will allow us to move quickly after assessing damage to impacted areas that we need to get beyond battery backup. We've also increased our mobile core networks for the increase in traffic we expect. That happens, as we all know, when homes lose power. Mobile data networks drastically increase, so we've added to our core capacity, and we've also made improvements to our fuel management system. We went through some of the same challenges, I would say, Bell and other counterparts have in Fiona, and so we knew we needed to do better, so we've solidified our fuel supply chain, and we also have extended that to contractors who are going to be positioned throughout the province to help us acclimate that current fuel management system with backup fuel if necessary.
Thank you, Chrissy. Taryn, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'll follow up again with Eastlink and Bell. If there are still service disruptions, despite your best efforts, how will consumers be compensated?
So I'll start and then hand it off to Chrissy. To be quite honest, until we understand the magnitude of the storm, the magnitude of the impact, there's no blanket, here's how we're going to approach it. We want to work with facts. We want to understand what happened, the magnitude of the impact before we make any decisions like that. And certainly, if it gets to that point where we are making decisions to compensate, we will obviously communicate that out through directly to our customers, but also through our social channels, any of the other mediums that we're using to communicate our response to the storm.
Thanks, Jeff. Chrissy?
Again, much the same. We're going to do right by our customers. One of our values is our customer service. So when as the storm unfolds and we decide what needs to be done from that perspective, account management, we will certainly do it case by case basis. But to Jeff's point, we will keep social media updated, our website, and call in voice messaging services for any updates on restoration and recovery efforts.
Thanks, Chrissy. We'll move along now to All Nova Scotia, Paul Bacon. Go ahead, Paul, with your first question.
Hi, my question would be for Chrissy Bailey. Just wondering if you could put a price tag on the improvements you were talking about a moment ago.
To be truthful, I'll say that's somewhat outside of my area of expertise, so I would hate to under or overestimate that investment, but we could certainly circle back and get you that information.
Thanks,
Thank
Chrissy.
you.
Paul, do you have a follow-up?
No, thanks.
No? Okay. Moving along, we'll go to CTV's Heidi Pachachik. Go ahead, Heidi. Heidi, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, there I am. Sorry about that. The mute button was playing with me. I guess it would be a question for someone in provincial EMO. I'm wondering how much concern there is about the safety and state of waterfronts. I'm thinking of the Halifax waterfront, or frankly anywhere in Nova Scotia, with the storm surge that's anticipated. Is there anything that's being done to secure them? How are you feeling about that?
Paul's just going to slide into position here, I see. Go ahead, Paul.
Certainly, no, thanks, and thanks for that question. It's certainly something that we're monitoring and in discussions with our municipal partners. Obviously, storm surge is one of the variables which we're monitoring with regard to this event, particularly along the Atlantic coast. So we've reached out and have been in contact with our municipal partners to see what steps they may be taking on that, which might be simply, removing certain things, and looking to kind of ensure that things are solidified ahead of any potential impacts from that. So really, those have been discussions that we've undertaken with our municipal partners.
Heidi, do you have a follow-up?
How much concern is there, and this would be for Nova Scotia Power, about power outages? What extra has been done in advance of this storm to try to keep the system up and running?
Thank you for the question, Heidi. So we've been really focused for the last week getting ready for this storm. Like Bob mentioned, it's the high winds that we're the most concerned about with Lee. And with those high winds, they definitely affect trees throughout the province and bring those trees down on power lines. The areas we're the most concerned about are that western part of the province, really Digby, Yarmouth, and Shelburne. We expect those will be the areas that have the highest winds and have the highest impact on trees. So we're pre-mobilizing all of our crews, all of our contractors that we're bringing in from other provinces down into those locations. They'll be spread throughout the entire province, but definitely the majority of people will be down in the western part, ready to respond to power outages as soon as they occur.
Thanks for that. Let's move along now to Radio Canada. Adrienne Blanc. Go ahead, Adrienne. It's your first question.
Thank you. I believe my question is for Minister Law. Where are we at improving the alerting system? Several municipalities know that their elderly, for example, don't really know how to use an app and may need a quick alert before the phone system goes down. So are the municipalities well equipped now if they need to send an alert?
Well, thank you for the question. And I mean, following the events of the summer, you may know we're in a review of the emergency alert system that's underway. In terms of getting the message out, there's multiple platforms that are used to get the emergency alert messages out. TV would be one, cell phones obviously is one, but it's not the only one. We would also use radio. We would advise people to have a battery radio available in case the power's out. So there's multiple platforms that we would put emergency alerts out on.
Does Paul Mason want to add to that response at all?
Paul, yeah, I think so. I think it's Paul. Yeah, as Minister touched on, I mean, there are various means of communication we can have with citizens that have events, this nature. Press releases, communications such as we're doing now, radio, and of course the alert ready system as well. We've activated our provincial coordination center here at noon today, and it will continue in operation throughout this event. In the case that some of the events that may impact in different areas of the province require utilization of the alert ready system, we'll work with our municipal partners to respond to the requests and disseminate those alerts, and we're prepared to support them on that front if required.
Thank you, Paul. Adrienne, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, for Chrissy Bailey and Jeff Moore, you've announced many improvements. Does it mean that people should expect just a few minutes of their network, cell network turning off, especially in rural areas? Or where are the spots where there still needs improvements and people should be more patient, I guess?
Sure. Adrienne, very good question. I'll maybe take a step back, and there's two key components to being able to deliver wireless service to Nova Scotians. You need a cell site with power, and you need a fiber connection back to a core network somewhere. So there's things in that scenario that we as Bell can control, and we can control the cell site, we can control fuel, we can control having batteries on sites, we can control our response. What we can't control is the damage the storm does. So if there's fiber cables broken, if there's poles down that are impacting that connection, or that fiber connection, to the cell site, those are things that I can't plan for. I can plan to respond, make sure I've got the right resources, the right equipment, the right material, but I don't know where that's going to happen. So we're very much dependent, if you wish, on what the storm does and where it does it. So long way of saying, for those things that I can be in control of, I definitely will state Bell, there will be an improved performance and improved response of the Bell wireless network, recognizing there's things in terms of damage caused by the storm that I can't control. And that's where we're just going to need to make sure we have the right response mechanisms in place.
Thanks, Jeff. Chrissy, do you want to add to that?
Again, not to sound much like Jeff. What we can control, we have completely prepared ourselves for that. We talked about adding capacity, adding small cell towers and small sites to add better levels of coverage, but we certainly cannot control what Mother Nature is about to bring forth. And so, as we all experience in catastrophic events of Fiona, we'll be ready to react. but we cannot control that level of damage or what's going to happen until the storm's aftermath. And then we'll react quickly to restore service. But we fully expect a better performance from the network with the capacity that we've added and the investments we've made in our backup systems.
Thank you for that. Chrissy, we'll move along now to Sarah with the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Sarah, with your first question.
Hi there. Thanks so much. Obviously, we're getting a lot of comments from people we interview about how they don't want this to be like Fiona. I wonder, Mr. Robichaud, if you could speak a bit about the differences between Lee and Fiona, like in terms of the speed at which it's traveling, strength, that kind of stuff.
Well, the intensity of the storm already is weaker than Fiona was when Fiona made landfall. For sure, Lee is a big storm, but Fiona was a pretty large storm as well. And some of the speeds, the forward motion of the storm, of both storms are kind of similar, but this is fairly typical for a storm of this nature that moves into northern latitudes to start accelerating. When that happens, that creates a phenomenon where the waves grow fairly high, and we're seeing some high waves out there now. So we are going to see some waves, some high water, strong winds. But on all counts, what we should see with this storm is going to be less than what we saw with Fiona. So for peak winds, the magnitude of the storm magnitude of the storm surge will be lower as well. The one thing that is a little bit different between the two storms is that this part of Nova Scotia was largely spared by the worst impacts of Fiona. So they're going to see something that they haven't necessarily seen in a little while. So really every storm is different. But I think when this is all said and done, although we will see impacts, the impacts won't be as severe as what we saw with Fiona.
Thanks, Bob. Sarah, your follow-up?
I guess this is for government folks, but some of the people kind of in the line of fire, so to speak, they've also been through fires and floods. And I'm wondering if the government is preparing to offer more mental health services to people who are maybe having a hard time right now with this anxiety.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that question. I mean, we realize that there's been a fair bit of weather and the EMO type event induced trauma across the province. There's no doubt about that. And we continue to make those investments. I think my colleague, Minister Comer, made a significant investment a couple of days ago, but we certainly recognize the stress these events cause on the public and continue to make investments in all sorts of healthcare, but including mental health resources.
Okay, thank you. And moving along, we'll go to Advocate Media, Jake Boudreau. Go ahead, Jake, with your first question.
Yes, this question is for Bob Robichaud. If the timing does line up with the high tides, how grave is the threat from the high waves and the storm surges for those along the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia?
Right, looking at our modeling right now, it looks like certainly some areas of the coastline will get to that level where there's certain things that flood. Again, when we're talking about storm surge, timing is just so critical. Like I said earlier, some of the timings of the larger waves and the highest surge seems to occur, the peak of that seems to occur closer to low tide. So if the storm speeds up a little bit, that will cause a little bit higher water levels at the coast. And if it's delayed by a certain amount of time, then we're looking into next high tide, which is going to be during the evenings. So some of the areas that we know usually have problems when we have these events, like Lawrencetown Beach, and some of the waves and some of the rocks that wash up over the walkway there. Those are the kinds of impacts we're going to see as we head into tomorrow morning and possibly into tomorrow evening.
Jake, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I noticed that you guys mentioned basically from Shelburne County east to Guysborough. Is there any threat to areas east of Guysborough, such as Richmond County, which is kind of shares the same coast?
Yeah, it should. Even the eastern tip of Guysborough County should be okay right now. Maybe the western area might see some issues there, but the further we go east along the Atlantic coastline, the better it will be. So up in the Cape Breton, it doesn't look like anything too significant at this point. It would take a very significant shift in the track towards the east to result in problems up there.
Thank you. We'll move along to the Tri-County Vanguard Saltwire with Tina Camo. Go ahead, Tina.
Thanks, Heather. Just confirming that you can hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, great. So my first question would be, when is it estimated that landfall will happen on Saturday? And what would be the duration of the storm as it passes through a certain region? So for example, I'm here in Yarmouth, like here in Southwestern Nova Scotia, when can we expect to start feeling the impacts of Lee? And how long can we expect it to go on for?
So for Yarmouth County, really what you're going to start to see some impacts late this evening, possibly into mid-evening if the storm does speed up. And a lot of times these things do speed up even more than what we first anticipate. So it is accelerating right now. If the rate of acceleration increases, then you're looking at things a little bit earlier. But certainly any kind of preparations should be completed by late this afternoon, early evening at the latest, because we are going to start to see some of that rain, and the winds are gradually going to start to pick up in the late evening, certainly into the overnight hours. By tomorrow morning in Yarmouth County, you're already into it at that point. And I mentioned earlier how large this storm is. So we are going to see some of those impacts arrive well in advance of the center of the storm. We're looking at the center arriving somewhere close to Yarmouth County tomorrow afternoon. But like I say, you're going to see the impacts or the effects of the storm way before that. Once the storm moves up wherever it happens to go, whether it's in the Bay of Fundy or up into New Brunswick, those winds are going to shift around to a more northwest to southwesterly direction. Those winds are going to continue for a period of time into Saturday night and Sunday. So I'd say the worst conditions, you're looking at about 12 hours. All told, for many areas, it's going to be more than 24 hours, maybe even up to 36 hours that you're going to see some sort of gusty winds from the storm itself, because it's gonna last into Sunday, certainly for some areas.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Tina.
Thank you, Heather. So people become very curious during storms such as this, and they want to go out and see what the damage is. Can someone stress the importance of people to stay off the roads, not just for their own safety, but for the first responders that are out there? And what should people do, like if they have down power lines on their properties or trees falling on power lines?
Thank you. I can respond to that one. Yeah, just really emphasize, as with past events, certainly to your point, there's a natural curiosity to go out there and kind of, take a look at what damage may have occurred, or, the intensity of the storm within your particular area. But, as with past events, we certainly encourage people to stay at home, stay off the roads, don't, give into a temptation to go out and take a look around. Obviously those types of activities when in the midst of an event, and even after an event like this, you're really putting yourself at significant risk, whether that be through things like falling trees, down power lines, or what have you. And of course, first responders be very busy helping to kind of mitigate some of the impacts of this event, and having unnecessary traffic out on the roads, or just even pedestrian is not helpful. So I certainly encourage people to follow direction and to stay home until this weather system is passed off.
And perhaps I'll call on Matt Drover just to specifically address that down power line question.
Thank you. So down power lines are definitely a safety concern. We recommend staying as far away from down power lines as possible. If you see lines on the ground, lines on vehicles, stay far away from that, and call into our call center right away, and we will send somebody out there to remove those power lines. Our people are trained in that, and they take that safety very seriously. So stay as far away from possible, and we'll come out and we will remove them.
Important message. Thank you, Matt. And let's wrap things up with Mike Tutton from Canadian Press. Go ahead, Mike, your first question.
I'll just stay with Matt for a second. You had a news conference earlier this year. You talked about adding tree trimming. Has any of that really come into effect yet, or the added tree trimming, or is that more a 2024 thing?
It's actually 2022 and 2023, and in addition 2024 as well. So after Fiona, we kept crews behind, about 100 forestry crews focused on those trees that had been weakened after Fiona. So we cut over 10,000 trees since Fiona. In addition to that, we are spending $32 million this year in 2023 on removing trees, trimming branches, getting trees as far away from power lines as possible. So $32 million this year, which we've spent a significant amount so far. And then in 2024, we're doubling our program up to about $40 million on tree trimming each year.
Thanks for that. Mike, do you have a follow-up?
For EMO, can you outline the plan that's in place if Chignecto Isthmus is damaged significantly in terms of ferries lined up, alternative methods to supply the province?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the Chignecto Isthmus is a critical concern to the province and something that we've been in discussions with the federal government on and work very closely with the province of New Brunswick. We're at the moment we're through our Department of Public Works, there's resources in place and preparations made to respond if there is any disruption in the Chignecto Isthmus.
And that's all the time we have for today. I would like to thank all our participants for sharing their time and their knowledge with Nova Scotians. And I encourage everyone to prepare for the storm this weekend. Thank you so much and have a good day.